Now I'm recording. Okay, welcome. So again, use the chat box to introduce yourself if you would like, include your name and organization that you're from. If you're attending outside of North Bay or Nipissing District. Yeah, and you can just share if you're a community member or if you're from a certain organization. So first, I'd just like to begin with a land acknowledgement. This land acknowledgement is, of course, assuming that we're all attending this event within the Nipissing District. If you're outside of the Nipissing District, then I invite you to please use the link in the chat box that Natalie will be sending to learn more about the territory you are meeting on. And again, when using the chat box, you can send it to all panelists and it will just be us that will see it. If you do all panelists and attendees, then everyone will see your message. So this land has been inhabited by Indigenous people for many years. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years before us. We acknowledge the land on which we gather is traditional territory of the Nipissing First Nation Anishinaabe. This territory is covered by the Robinson, Huron, and Upper Canada treaties. We recognize and deeply appreciate this historic connection to the land. And we recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous people have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community and our province and country as a whole. I would like to acknowledge that there is still great work to do in regard to reconciliation, safety, trust, and decolonization. And I firmly believe that actions speak louder than words. So I invite you to reflect inwards as to what your actions are doing to recognize and support Indigenous people within our community and across Canada as well. A great first step would be, of course, to listen and to learn and support, listen, learn, and support resources, research, books, articles, artwork, etc., created by or published by Indigenous artists and authors. So essentially, listen and learn from Indigenous people, I think, is the best way that we can move forward together. So next, I'd quickly like to clarify why we're using the word women today for this event and its significance. So women with the X in replacement of the E is deliberately used to include and recognize all women and female identified individuals, including transgender and non-binary people, as the term woman with an A or an E is limiting and only includes people within the binary standard. I understand that best practices, of course, change, and some people may have a preference of terms. So I do please invite you to email me with any further questions or suggestions that I could make or learn from in the future. I would also like to recognize that certain groups of individuals, including but not limited to Black, Indigenous, people of color, Two-Spirit folks, those who identify within the LGBTQIA+ group, those who identify as having a disability, and women, all experience barriers to services, violence, discrimination at disproportionate rates. So during today's discussion, the panelists will be invited to speak on how COVID-19 has impacted their clients or the community they serve in various ways based on these different intersections. So in hindsight, today's session probably could have been called Community and COVID, but this event was specifically created in replacement of our annual Women's March. And I wanted to focus a bit more on women and female identified folks, but I'm definitely open to discussing including various groups of vulnerable populations during these times. So first, I'll have the panelists quickly introduce themselves, just including your name, pronouns if you'd like, and what program you're from or center you're from. And then we'll move on to the discussion. And then after the discussion, of course, there'll be a Q&A. So send those questions into the chat box. Like I said, Natalie will be monitoring that. At the end of the session, if there's time, we can use the raise your hand function if attendees would like to share from their organization and their perspective. I know there's some folks here from the health unit and other community partners. If you'd like to quickly share at the end, if there's time, just what you're doing and how your clients have been affected. Afterwards, attendees will be emailed a link to this recording. You'll be emailed an evaluation survey. Please be honest, but also please be kind. You will also be emailed a follow-up package of ways that you can support these groups of organizations and people here today. Is there anything else I wanted to add today? I don't think so. Oh, Natalie is including some supports in the chat box, including my email address for any further questions. There will be support resources, of course, our 24-hour sexual violence helpline. There'll be some chat support options, sexual assault centers for Ontario, a mental health and crisis services list from Canada, and a virtual self-care healing space. So if you do feel that you need to exit this space and have somewhere safe to go, it's a virtual room that you can click around, and there's some like self-care activities. So you can open up those links and have them with you, or save them for later, up to you. So that being said, I will stop talking and I will start with Amanda, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. As Kylie said, my name is Amanda, and I am the women's worker at the North Bay Jail. I guess my official title is Women's Rehabilitation Officer, but caseworker.
Thank you, Amanda. And I'll pass it on to Erica.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. My name is Erica Lougheed. I wear a few hats, and I'll jump in between them, but I'm a current municipal councillor in East Ferris and also work as a manager of advancement at fundraising. And right now I'm the Ontario NDP candidate for Nipissing as well as in the next provincial election. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. And next is Kathleen.
She, her, and I'm the Executive Director of Victim Services of Nipissing District. I hope everybody's well.
Thank you, Kathleen. And next is Megan.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Megan, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Executive Director at Amelia Rising Sexual Violence Support Center.
Thank you. And certainly, sorry, last but certainly not least, is it Taylor?
It's Taylor.
Okay, I kept wanting to call you Talia, and I'm like, no, the I is before the L. So
you are not the. My name is Taylor Surgeon. I'm the Healing and Wellness Coordinator with the North Bay Indigenous Friendship Center. I'm here to speak on behalf of my experience and that of some of my co-workers.
Great, thank you. Apologize for internet connection. It is not reliable, so I'm sorry if anyone is struggling. If you need anything clarified, please enter it into the chat box and make sure you're including all panelists and attendees if you want everyone to see it. So the first question is for panelists, and you can start whenever, is how has COVID affected your organization or your work, specifically relating to vulnerable populations such as women, girls, and families? Amanda, I'm gonna go in order of my screen. So Amanda, if you wanna start.
So for us at the jail and the clients we serve, include women and men here, but specifically for women, we've got our new admissions who we've had to, of course, place in intake medical quarantine units for 14 days. Reasons, obviously, but it does increase that of isolation. COVID tests are optional for our clients on day 10. Our external program has unfortunately been mostly on hold. I think we had a small break where we were trying to welcome community. That didn't last too long with the provincial lockdown. We are compensating by increasing our internal program as much as we can. And then I think the other part is that community services being closed or reduced during COVID times means that we have women with discharge planning. We have, I would say we're less able to rely on some of those things for discharge planning. And then I think something that we're starting to consider into 2021 would be the after effects of the financial support. People who were ineligible but did receive that CERB benefit, and we're seeing a lot of that here. Like our clients are probably mostly not eligible, but they did receive some of that funding while on out in the community. And so we do help with taxes and so on, but those are some of the things we're really unknown at this point to us. I think you're on mute, Kylie.
I am, sorry. Thank you, Amanda. I just want to clarify, I'm not sharing a PowerPoint this morning, unfortunately. There's been enough tech issues, so I don't want to add that into the mix. Natalie is sharing the panelist questions in the chat box though. Erica?
Thank you. So I don't really have any, like, I can't speak on behalf of clients per se, but just the general population that I work with. But as many of us know, and as we're experiencing today, you know, schools and education, especially in a rural environment, are incredibly challenging. So that does not level the playing field very easily for people who who are lucky enough in some cases to work from home, and also for students trying to access their online schooling. I don't know how many of you live in, you know, outside rural Ontario, like in the more rural areas of North Bay, but, you know, internet access is not only incredibly expensive. We have some families that are actually buying multiple service in their cell phones, and they're using their really bad landlines, and they're also buying other devices to try to just make ends meet. So they're putting these patchwork together of internet access, you know, coming up to the tune of $1,000 a month for many. So it's been challenging for that. And also the synchronous learning of, you know, multiple children needing to be on multiple devices at the exact same time. Mm-hmm. So there's that's a big challenge for sure. I hear a lot about that. There's also an incredible, you know, reduction in voices. So often one thing I'd like to just note is that not only are women like leaving the workforce at big rates, as we've been reading about in the paper, but the participation in the municipal process is also quite a bit lower. You know, we've had an exit on boards and committees, and those voices are really hard to replace because they represent a whole segment of the population. So that's been really difficult too. But I'll get into a little bit more in some other answers. So I won't take up too much more space here, but that's pretty much sums up a lot of it.
Thank you, Erica. And Kathleen, and please let me know if anyone needs the question reread again.
Yes, so echoing some of what Erica said for sure about some of the new barriers. But to begin with, I think when COVID first ago, things got really quiet in our office. So we went almost 2 weeks with no calls for service, which is unheard of. We respond to more than 800 calls a year. And that was really scary for us. We did put out some media about that because we were really concerned about the women and families that we support, being isolated, having increased barriers to requesting help, even just having pressure valves released, right? So when folks can go to other school or out in the community where they can have other interaction, healthier environment than when we're confined at home. And I think for any of us, regardless of our situations, we know that the prolonged time spent inside, maybe by ourselves or with a very small group, has all affected our mental health. So we can imagine for those families who are coping with unhealthy living environments, how much more difficult that is. As a service provider, we certainly experience challenges and helping our clients navigate the support system. Lots of different services in our community had to move to remote operation, and the service climate dramatically changed, and that had an impact on those that we support. We've certainly seen over the past year a large increase in crisis calls. We're not a mental health provider, but we certainly are on the receiving end of folks who are just in crisis and really looking for help anywhere they can get it. And I think there's a lot of things that we sort of take for granted as seeming as it's seamless. And today actually is a good example. So in a way, it was I know you said it was your own personal lesson, Kylie, but it's also like, this is a reality. It's not seamless. There are hiccups and challenges. And as Erica said, you know, with multiple devices and within our district, there's definitely zones that don't have high-speed internet, who don't have access to good cell service. And that has real implications when our world has really gone online. And I don't think we can sort of not like, we need to emphasize that more, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because it has a real impact on the lives of those in rural communities. But probably the largest change for our organization is that we lost our volunteer program. So we are mandated to be 24/7 response, but we're not funded to be staffed for 24/7. So for 20 plus years, we've worked with a dedicated core of professional volunteers who are amazing people who give back to their community in a very big way, but because of health and safety protocols, we no longer can offer that program. So that means that a staff of 3 with a dedicated team leads have to respond to where it used to be a 25-person response. And that has a lot of changes for our organization.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, like, when, you know, I often think of like the volunteer program aspect. Like, I feel like that's definitely, and a lot of organizations and areas have taken a hit because it's not essential. Megan, do you have anything you'd like to share about COVID and Amelia Rising?
Thanks, Kylie. So I guess I'll go back again to the beginning and say that we also experienced a very quiet period when COVID first hit last March. We were able to move very quickly into remote service offering. So I think there was only a hiccup of maybe 2 days while offices were moved from one space to home. And so all of our clients received continued service with those minor little hiccups. And we were able to move to virtual, like telephone or on virtual counseling very, very quickly. That said, what has been put on hold, and we're just now working on getting back up and running, is all of our groups. And so we had many clients involved in our groups and workshops, some psychoeducational and some trauma informed. And those all had to be put on hold just due to lack of infrastructure and technology to get that all up and running, because we didn't have it in a virtual modality. We're working on that right now. That being said, though we experienced a very quiet period, we did move into a very busy period where I'm not going to recall exactly when, but sort of when we died down from that first lockdown, and then people started to realize, okay, like services are still there, and our message out on social media, you know, letting people know that we're still here and we're still in operation. And then we saw a huge uptake in services and clients requesting support. And then it was our ability to meet that wait list in a timely manner. So some of the changes that we made and what we're doing now, I think with good success, is building in more space for what we call support visits. So that we can see our clients within, you know, about 7 days usually, but within 14 days for sure. So it's not ongoing counseling, but it is something that they can access right away, and they can access multiple times while they wait for counseling, so that we're not leaving people without anything. And I think one of the other barriers we've seen is that not all of our clients could access, as has been mentioned, the, you know, online or virtual services. And so we've had an ongoing wait list, which we were able to address in that nice little window where we were able to open up and see clients, you know, in a very different way, with lots of space and one at a time. And so we were able to address a small portion of that wait list. But again, we're now in lockdown and not able to see those clients face to face. And barriers being technological, but also that a lot of our clients have had children at home and don't have confidentiality to access support and counseling in a way that feels, you know, safe and private for them. So those pieces, and I'll talk about some of that a little bit later, but you know, we're learning as we go, and we're just working very hard to meet people where they're at, and to, you know, discover the barriers, and then, you know, figure out ways to reduce those gaps.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely not easy throwing all your programs up online. Like, speaking from a public educator perspective, throwing everything online, it's not as easy just putting a PowerPoint together. You have to be aware of the safety concerns as well, like you spoke of, the confidentiality, the privacy, sharing of devices, and where you are in the home. Maybe you have a small home and you don't have space to go that's, you know, for yourself, especially for counseling services, or to call out to a crisis helpline, whether it's victim services or ours. Thank
or
you.
even time,
Yeah.
because as I'm also a mother with 2 kids in virtual learning, my head has been spinning on those days, going from, you know, child to child with like what their little, you know, what the needs are.
Yeah.
And I don't know where some would find the time in their day to even access the kind of support or self-care that they need.
Taylor, do you have anything else? Anything you would like to share on how COVID has affected your organization or work, specifically related to women, girls, and families?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a multifaceted. Anybody who is familiar with the Friendship Center knows that we deal with clients from all stages of life, from prenatal right up to elderly. The Friendship Center has seen a bit of slowing down, same with others, with clientele. In my field specifically, with the healing and wellness, deal with a lot of people who are in vulnerable or at risk of violence. So especially when it comes to the counseling part as well, with the lockdown, we've had to close down the Friendship Center, which for many of our clients has probably one of the safest places for them, and also the most comfortable place for them to talk or to share or to, well, cry especially, to be able to feel and let go and release. And right now what we're seeing is, you know, with the closing of the Friendship Center, our staff has also seen an increase in mental emotional stress, because we know that there's a lot that we want to do, that we need to do, that our clients need from us, but we just can't because of the health restrictions. So a lot of it has been going into just physical supports, and whenever they can, you know, have a minute to talk online or through phone. A lot of our clients are families as well. So a lot of right now is going into food, clothing. A lot of people need assistance with rent and other financial assistance. But even with that, a lot of the other funds that we get require us to have paperwork, which we can only now get with the added restrictions of this lockdown if we, you know, go see somebody in person or be outside, weather permitting, on the day that you have to go and do paperwork with them. And because a lot of us, in our business, we have, you know, our office phones and our emails. Not everybody has access or can navigate the online space, especially when it comes to elders. So what's happening is we have to remotely check phones, which means we're missing a lot of those important calls that we can just pick up right away. And before, when we didn't have as much restrictions, a lot of our staff were half in the office and half out of the office. So we still had a little bit of that chance to be connected with them a little more. So the gears have kind of stopped when it comes to a lot of our community work, a lot of our ceremony work, a lot of our big events, which support people, and that one-on-one interaction that a lot of our clients really need. And that's put an added stress on the staff, because, you know we could be doing so much more, but we're very restricted in how much we can do.
Thank you for sharing. And I really like that you did talk about the staff impact as well, because as service providers, our clients are definitely all being affected, but it affects us to see our clients being affected and kind of feeling like powerless, that we're doing the best we can with what we're given, and our best isn't good enough. So the next question is in regards to specifically how COVID has affected, or the effects of COVID have impacted clients' experience of gender-based violence, sexual violence, or intimate partner violence, domestic violence, any type of violence. So if you want to share, if you have anything specific you'd like to share in regards to that, Natalie, if you're able to share that question, and also reshare the supports as well in the chat. I just want to make people to ensure that they feel as supported as they can right now during these times in case anything triggering comes up during these conversations. Amanda, if you want to start, and then I can go to Erica, Kathleen, Megan, and Talia again.
All right. So I don't necessarily, when I'm working with women here, they're obviously it's here and so away from the partner. So sometimes that does come up in discussion. I would say it sort of depends on how long they're in custody for. Generally, everyone's concerned is to get out of here first. Necessarily come up, but we are finding it difficult. I think the impacts are that services are less accessible to a lot of us who provide that service. We would argue that we've done a really great job, and I think we have, of making those things available by phone or by internet. But some of the people that I work with, when they're homeless, they aren't seeing all the social media or the emails that we see as service work or with a home to access these things. So they still do feel that some of the services are, and I mean, services are limited, right? Because they can't just go knocking on the door, walking for anything right now. They're not meeting up with, a lot of the time they get to know about the services in the community that we can support them by, you know, by me bringing in the programs or community partners to do the program for them here, and that's not happening. So they don't even get to know about those programs here so much. I can provide them with material, of course, but before we used to have a schedule where community partners were in providing services to women on a regular basis, and women really, really appreciated the time spent chatting with community providers and getting to know about the services. So I think coming from people we work with who are homeless, meaning they may not have the phone or access to internet and all of those things, they're finding services are quite limited. Getting into treatment centers is just not that easy. So we're still, of course, willing to provide them and always offering services in terms of referrals to shelters and treatment centers and counseling options. That's still part of what I do and will always do, but it's just not quite as easy for them to access it on the outside. We've also increased our program, our internal programs, to support some of that. So like our internal programs such as recognizing abusive relationships or healthy relationships, we've tried to increase the ability for them to participate in studies while they're here. But it's still a struggle for them to access services. They're not in the know necessarily as much as we are.
That's a really good point. Like, as much as we are promoting our services or getting the word out there that we're offering these supports, if you don't have access to see that information, you're not going to get it. It's plain and simple. And again, it's one of those things that we're aware of and trying to figure out how we can navigate the situation. Erica, is there anything you would like to add in regards to forms of violence with the community?
I just want to take a second to note like how interesting the panel is that you put together here, Kylie, like how you've got different people at different stages of often people's lives. So I'm already really enjoying it. So thank you. From the municipal standpoint, anyone who lives in, you know, the rural areas right now, there's been a sharp increase in violence in many forms. And it's come into, and I say this like it's threatened a lot of, I say threatened because I'll come back to that in a second, but there has been, I just got our recent OPP stats, although they don't tell the whole story, there is definitely a sharp increase in domestic disturbance, people themselves or others, and also a huge increase in like neighborly disputes and things like that, and crime, lots of crime. So the crime rates have gone up, and speeding, but you know, more important, the crime rates have gone up quite a bit. And this, I remember at the start, I'm thinking to, you know, what some people had mentioned earlier, how there was a quiet moment. So at the start, there was like, you know, the rates, the stats we were getting were there was not a lot going on, right? And during a council meeting, there was like, oh, well, you know, there doesn't seem to be a problem with domestic violence or anything like that happening in East Ferris. And I'm like, it's because everyone's at home and there's nowhere to, like, how are you supposed to call? Who are you supposed to get help from? So it's come full circle in terms of learning around the table a little bit. But the other thing, you know, when you see, many people here would agree with me saying is like, there's more. So the numbers that you see on those stats, there are more. It's just how many people aren't calling, how many people aren't accessing what they need to get to. You know, I could talk a lot about I'm sure some people could give more insight on this, but on how things are reported. So like, you know, what does domestic disturbance mean? Like, I would far rather it say violence against women, or like, I would far rather it be really specific, but it's such a broad term because we're so uncomfortable with naming it what it is. Anyway, but people are on edge for sure. To me, it's a reflection of so much more. There's, you know, like the phone calls I get from people in the community are very angry. People are near tears on every single conversation. A lot of people are suffering with a lot right now. But my last point here is, you know, it's really easy, I find, for people to fall into the individual trap of this. So for example, with crime, you know, why can't they need to get out of here, instead of looking at it as like a larger reflection of society of what's going on. And to me, that to me is my biggest concern, is this individual finger pointing, instead of looking at it more broadly and thinking about how we can, you know, better suit the needs of people who are really struggling and turning to things like crime to make ends meet. You know, it's definitely not the most the greatest way to ask for help, but definitely there's people who do need it right now. So I think from the rural perspective, we're starting to really feel the trickle effects that we haven't always felt, you know, in especially in East Ferris. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica, for sharing. I'll recognize that my internet is unstable, no surprise. So I apologize. Yeah, what you're saying, like with the individual finger pointing, I feel like is very true. I think some people might not agree, but I feel like we're in that outburst stage. You know, we can only be so compact and tight together and limited before we outburst, and whether that's crime or being violent towards others. And you said neighbor disputes, which I think is important, because it's not just, you know, I think we're all just getting stressed and we're taking that out on other people, and just, you know, it's just a spilling of emotions, right? And I won't take up too much time. I do want to hear from Kathleen.
I echo some of the things that Erica said, and that we've certainly seen an increase in the number of neighbor disputes. Good fences don't always make good neighbors, as well as theft from property. And of course, I think rural communities' knowledge and awareness about intimate partner violence even before the pandemic improvement, because I mean, what better way to isolate people than on acres of property? So I think the pandemic has just magnified those concerns. But we're seeing research slowly come out, and one of the things that I found not surprising, but I think those who maybe aren't in the sector would, is that 1 in 10 women in Canada right now are extremely worried about violence in their home, and that's probably an understatement. Because we know the severity of violence that women are experiencing in their homes is quite high. We did have a femicide in Northern Ontario during the pandemic, and certainly, unfortunately, women across this province and country have continued to lose their lives as a result of intimate partner violence. You know, you only have to look at the Nova Scotia shooting that started out as an intimate partner violence situation to see that that continues to happen. And likely, as we've all talked about, you know, we're seeing added stress holds, certainly with the, you know, having to provide childcare, whether it's working from home, working from school, whether people have lost jobs. We've also seen an increase in alcohol consumption that has now been documented, and people are staying at home and drinking more, which can lead to violent situations. Our concern again is that women are limited and where they can go for help and how to access that help. Again, you need to have reliable cell or internet service. You need to have check-ins. If family and friends aren't aware of what's going on, or that what's going on is maybe getting worse, that all of a sudden there is violent outbursts where there hadn't been before, our ability to sort of check in on one another on either side of that equation, whether it's a concerned friend or family member or the victim, has been diminished because of the isolation. And I think as well, we're going to see the effects of this long term. I think there's a sort of in the ether, this idea that it's the race to the vaccine. But I'm really concerned about the long-term impacts that COVID has had on the lives of folks and their ability to cope, and the trauma that this has inflicted on many people, and where we'll see that even after the vaccination has happened, or even after COVID is, you know, a thing we once went through, because I think we're only at the beginning of really the outputs of what this pandemic is going to put on our services.
Thank you, Kathleen. I did want to touch on the fact that you brought up trauma and like the long-term effects, and that some people do think of trauma as being that like one-time event that was big, bad, and scary and traumatizing, but COVID and the pandemic itself is a form of trauma that we're all experiencing together right now. And the way we react and the way we're coping essentially, you know, can affect others. And some people aren't coping great, which is understandable in the sense. I won't go into that too much, but Megan, do you want to share about some of the things that you've seen?
I didn't catch the last. So I would just, what has already been said, that, you know, there's this, you know, while we do have lots of things in place and we are adapting as service providers to offer, you know, all kinds of support and to fill in, you know, the gaps that we see, I don't know that everyone has access to that information, and I also get the feeling anecdotally that it's, you know, it's changing at times. So sometimes, you know, when we're out of lockdown or when our numbers are low, it's a different way to access service than when we go back into lockdown. And so there's always this, what is available and how do I access it? I think that, you know, also already been said, but that violence, you know, domestic violence and intimate partner violence and gender-based violence has always been around and has always been at numbers higher than the statistics would actually report. But that while we're in these mandated lockdowns and we are stuck at home with, you know, I don't know, the emergency alert that came out the other day said that you can only go out for a doctor's appointment or outside to get exercise outside and to get groceries. There might have been another mention, the specific reasons you can go out, but you are not told. And so that really limits people in like any kind of, you know, sort of non-professional supports that they would have had pre-pandemic. You know, if they had a mother that they could sort of, now they're 5, worried about illegal to visit this household. Like who do they go to when sort of their way out? Or it might be neighbor's house and now they can't do that. So I think that the isolation is in it. And as was mentioned before, you know, like there's a lot of increase in anxiety and a lot of increase in, you know, mental health concerns for all in general, but some of us have better systems. And I think poverty comes into this. And I think that, you know, already your mental health status would play into this. And so you know, my ability to cope with something is very different from someone who doesn't have, you know, a visa to do their curbside pickup order. Because that seems to be about the only way that I can access most of the things that I need right now, is that I have a credit card that I can access. And, you know, so there's just like these different levels of, you know, privilege that some of us have and some of us don't. And so we're already struggling. The added, you know, stress of a pandemic, it just exacerbates the things that we, you know, might have been working at one point, but maybe aren't working so well now. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, you're absolutely right about the parts of privilege, like the fact that, you know, some of us, like I feel privileged that I can access a counselor online, right? Not many people can do that to support their mental health right now. Or the fact that you do have that visa to be able to do groceries and do curbside pickup, order groceries online, have them delivered, do, you know, things like that. Small things like that are forms of the privilege that we don't always recognize. And not to say that those things are, you know, making your experience that much better, but they're just, you know, things that affect our mental health that we don't always think about. And just being like so close knit and captured into your house, like it can raise tension, raise anxiety. I've heard lots of people say that they've become more agitated. They're snapping back at their partners, kids, you know, siblings, things like that. And it's like, where is that coming from? It's coming from these added on stressors, right? And just, yeah. Megan, is there anything else you want to share?
Well, I would just say it's always been the case that when we sort of express or release our feelings, that we tend to do it around the people that we feel most comfortable around and safest around, or that we have power over. And so that generally fits into the family situation. And when you have very little ability or outlets, you know, available to you that you used to have, and you're in these, you know, close family units for long periods of time, I guess it makes sense. It's not good. But
Taylor, is there anything you would like to add, share? Sorry, I go down by my screen. Unfortunately, you're the bottom.
Yeah, for sure. I think right now, all of us are seeing a very complex variables affecting all of our clients and the community members. But I think what I'd like to touch on that hasn't been touched on already is the very unique experience of people of color, especially Indigenous communities right now. It's already been especially heated with, you know, the Black Lives Matter and, you know, the lobster fisheries out east. And so we are also seeing a lot of racial tension in our communities. I've had some clients who are afraid to go to the hospitals because of, you know, the violence that they see there. And of course, while the COVID vaccine is supposed to be a good thing for people who are vulnerable, what we're seeing right now is also a complete loss of trust in the government, because they're saying, you know, send it up to the reserves first. So now it's almost like we've become, you know, a gopher, or, you know, again, you know, we're the tests again, you know, and it's, a lot of people are very wary of it, and for good reason. You know, there's a lot of historical trauma, especially regarding the medical field in Indigenous communities. Even doctors doing things that you wouldn't see in, you know, non-Indigenous communities, you know, ordering, you know, amputations or other things that wouldn't be necessary if they had proper medical regulations or things like that in communities. As well as, I want to mention that the extreme amount of PTSD that has been kicking in for a lot of our communities, we're seeing a lot of numbers that are going, you know, on the flip side though, like when we had clients who are in a good place before COVID, they are continuously you know, with some gentle reminders here and there, or, you know, extra food support, they are continuing to do good in their families. But with the isolation, it's almost as if that the isolation has created a new sense of reality that isn't grounded enough, so that we see a lot of regression due to PTSD, especially, actually I watched a live stream video of one of my friends that were talking yesterday, that residential school survivors and survivors of especially family trauma are having a really hard time right now. And in our communities, addiction is taught as a coping skill. So, and of course, it's very easy when you're in that mental state of addiction, and your body is in that state of addiction, and there's lack of trust in the medical system to help, and there's lack of services, you know, it's very easy for people to fall back into negative mental states and, you know, negative thoughts, feelings. And then, of course, when, you know, you have repressed trauma or trauma that you haven't finished healing from or moving on from, the PTSD kicks in. And of course, now you're living in that same reality where you're hurt, you're angry, and you just kind of don't really know what's going on. So for the Indigenous people, even going to the hospital, very, you know, very touchy, touchy subject, or, you know, with the COVID vaccine, you know, an intense amount of paranoia, especially with those because there are a lot of families right now with vulnerable people, those who have or you know, elders. Our elders are especially having a hard time right now, especially those who have been through residential school, because family, you know, has just dropped off the map. You know, they can't, even for our workers, seeing our workers was one of those really important contacts for them, and now, you know, that's not there. So it's definitely a lot of complex variables and life experiences for our clients that are contributing to violence in different ways. And some of our women and girls specifically, there's always the risk of sexual, mental, emotional violence, and not just, you know, physical violence. And our children especially, because when our adults or our elders or other people are really stressed out, our children pick up on that. And that is something that they start internalizing. So it becomes a very tricky situation for them as well, having to walk on eggshells in the home, you know. Safe space, you know, if there's a lot of people who have, you know, larger families with multiple children. So having that safe space, that quiet space that they might actually receive at school, or the parents might receive when the children are away, or, you know, that little bit of relief that they can get when they go visit family. You know, that's not there. So our children are also in that dangerous situation as well for some families. And of course, with the addition of, you know, the change in reality, and if somebody is triggered at home, they're not always thinking about, you know, the children or other people first, because it's a survival mechanism and your brain is in survival mode. And I think that is one of the main contributors right now, is that people are regressing back into their survival mode and what they know how to survive. And those coping skills that they received when they were surviving as children, as teenagers, when they were traumatized, they weren't good coping skills. And they're regressing back into that right now.
Thank you. I echo like everything you said. I see a lot of head nods. There is a few points I wrote down. when you were talking about racial tensions and blame, and I think like people always look for somewhere or something to blame, and regarding race, like it's sometimes that's people's first go is just to blame a minority, or like when Black Lives Matter were happening, like that was the center of attention. There was a lot of blame directed there, and same with like Indigenous folks. And what Erica said regarding like pointing the finger and like wanting to blame other people, we're blaming people and groups of people versus, you know, looking at society and the situation as a whole. Again, it says my internet is unstable. Awesome. So thank you for bringing that up. And yeah, just talking about like the individual level versus like community or Canada, the globe. This is a global pandemic, so even just the world, right? And thank you for bringing out like the mistrust with the vaccine, the government, and that whole rollout within the medical field is something that it was in my mind, but I hadn't really considered it until you had mentioned it. And thank you so much for bringing that up, because I feel like that's another area, like the medical realm, that I hadn't even thought of, especially with like the mistrust with the vaccine. Understandable. And I didn't know that it was going like that certain reserves were getting the vaccine first. I wasn't aware about that. So thank you for bringing that up. And again, the mistrust and the concerns surrounding that as well. And children, yes, bearing the burden that parents are carrying as well, and feeding off of that energy that the parents are carrying, because that's a lot of pressure for parents to keep it together all the time, 24/7. Some of it's going to leak out into the children, and the coping mechanisms and strategies that people were taught, whether they're healthy or not, are being used, right? So the next question, we've kind of already answered it, so I'm open to skipping it, but it's what adaptations has your organization had to make to address these new needs to serve clients better? So, I mean, we've all really talked about switching things to online, virtual learning, phone counseling, and we've talked about the barriers to accessing these services and accessing this information. We've talked about the volunteer program at Victim Services kind of being squashed essentially because that was a change, unfortunately, organization had to make. But is there anything else that wasn't talked about regarding changes that have had to be made to your organization to serve clients? This kind of goes into the next question, but I'll leave it on the floor if anyone wants to add to anything that they've said. Kathleen?
I have something to add, but Kathleen, if you want to go first.
Sorry, Amanda, but thanks. You take the pressure of you going first all the time. Yeah, no, I have some like positive things that we've adapted that I just wanted to highlight. Thanks to some COVID grants, we were able to, and they're still until March 31st, offer brief grief support, so private grief counseling. That's a real gap in our community. There's no not-for-profit grief counseling in the Nipissing region. And so right now, if someone experiences a sudden or unexpected death, especially, you know, we really think about the families that we support who've lost a loved one to suicide, to a private counselor for up to 4 sessions. And as well, we got another grant, thanks to COVID, that has allowed us to purchase some tech equipment, recognizing again that, you know, people are trying to do a lot maybe on their little cell phone, so maybe a tablet would make it easier for them, or a good headset, so that if they are able to access virtual, whether it be, you know, any other social service or health service, or even like their OW worker, they can do so with better technology available to them at this time. So I just wanted to at least create a positive spin.
Yes, thank you. Is anyone else? Amanda, I think you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I think just for us here at the jail, our building is almost 100 years old, and so we struggle on the best of days to find the space to accommodate all the things we're trying to accommodate, which is much different than when the institution was built originally, right? So we are a bit of court inside our building, which is really frustrating for all staff, and it causes a delay in courts is what we're seeing. Inmates are having to attend court several times over before they may get bail or before to be released. So I can't imagine the frustration they have going to court 5 times over before they can actually have like a real hearing. Some of the struggles we've had to try and make changes to and adapt to. Same thing with any of the programs and services. You know, initially it's just cancel it, and not knowing how long it would go on, and then of course seeing how long this has gone on, we need to try and find ways to still offer those services. And so we do have a small area we can offer certain types of community partners to come in and see inmates one-on-one, but we're all trying to share that space. And then I think we've had to adapt, of course, because we don't offer a type of service that we can provide virtually. Of course, we all need to actually be here and be in the building. So staff screening is a huge adjustment, right? In dealing with this, you know, do you come to work with certain symptoms or not? Because at the end of the day, we do need to have a certain number of staff in the building. So we are all wearing safety glasses and masks and things, but the staff shortages, and not necessarily because of COVID, we've, you know, fortunately not had that. We've not had an outbreak or any cases inside our institution. We're really thrilled about that, of course, but any kind of symptoms you might be feeling means you stay home, and staff shortage really creates a whole different world for people who are living in this building and working in this building. We don't usually technology. I mean, I know we all don't love this type of forum. I mean, it's done what we need it to do during COVID times, but it's not something we utilize ever with clients. It's a lot of in-person services because we have to consider security. So we've only started to talk about, can we in certain circumstances bring a laptop into a building, program room with our clients? We have to weigh the security risks there to still be able to offer some of the important services, you know, potentially a group session with any of the community partners. We have to just the same. That has to be priority, right? So those are things. And then internet is not a thing in jail, so we have to find a way to run those just the same. It's to adapt and change.
Thank you, Amanda, for speaking. Yeah, like just from what I've heard on the news of it within like jails across Ontario, even Canada, just seeing outbreaks happening, you know, people are like, well, how is COVID getting in? Well, the workers are still going in and out, right? And, you know, worker safety and inmate safety as well as like a concern, of course. And it's, you know, once there's an outbreak in an institution like that, it spreads like wildfire, right? So I'm really grateful, knock on wood, that hasn't happened or affected our community yet.
Yeah, we've seen some outbreaks provincially in our provincial institutions, not here, which is awesome. We are the risk at the end of the day, aside from the new admit, but staff are the risk to this building, seen as we're the ones coming in and out. And then we do worry about bringing anything home to families.
Of course, yeah. Is there anything else anyone wants to share about just changes? Yep, go ahead.
So obviously this was a little bit much more restrictive. So we were trying to be very creative in how we can reach, because we also had a few new workers come in. So that there was a difficulty there with the new workers and trying to get our face into the community and to have that connection. And so what we ended up doing was a program. So a lot of our programs usually kind of network together to put on, you know, events or programs. So we had the food security program run for a little while in the fall, and that was open to pretty well anybody who needed it. But, you know, at the Friendship Center, we do have, you know, priority of, you know, our clients and Indigenous people. Those are our goal group. But we also recognize that there are a lot of other people who need it, especially in the community that is homeless right now. So we had the food security program open up, and then we also opened up our medicine room. Obviously, we also had implemented the personal protective equipment, and we had ordered plexiglasses, the large kind of plexiglasses for our tables. While the barriers, I mean, it's a little uncomfortable, it did allow us to see them in a much more safe manner. so that they can still come in and we were still keeping with the house regulation codes and stuff. And then what we also ended up doing was twice a week in the afternoon, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we had a hot chocolate day. So that allowed us to be outside of the building. We could have hot chocolate, snacks, you know, warming clothes, you know, hats and mitts and stuff for anybody who needed it. But also for people who in the community were just going by. It helped get the new faces of our workers out there, but it also allowed us to safely have that communication with them. And, you know, and some people, we had a couple people drive by and shout, you know, thank you for caring. We've had, you know, somebody who had a really bad day, you know, they have free hot chocolate, free snack. That was made almost every Tuesday, and it was like right on traditional food, or even just having a healthy snack when, you know, some of the children would walk by after school. So it was really great to be able to do that and to be able to reach out to a community in a way that was safe, while still not ideal. It still allowed us to have some of that one-on-one interaction and communication with them, and to help provide people who were looking for services to reach out. Although there were some people who were a little confused and thought that we were selling it because they weren't as familiar with the Friendship Center as a nonprofit organization, but that was all right. And then, of course, with some extra planning, our executive director opened up the warming center for our homeless community on the weekends, because we saw that there was a need that most of the programming was happening during the week. So after some of the lockdown restrictions lift, they're planning to have some and, you know, present some things and to help work with whoever wants it when they come to the shelter. And at the same time, you know, they have a comfortable space. We have lots of mats and other things that they can sleep on. They have, you know, they keep the social distancing with some reminders. They have the personal protective equipment and workers who can provide healthy and traditional food for them. So that was really great. And in the works right now, they're thinking of bringing back the food security program because of the lockdown, but that has yet to be determined with, you know, funds and other things. So yeah, we're trying to be creative with it and to fill some of the gaps that we see while while staying with the restrictions.
Thank you. It's funny you mentioned about the hot chocolate. Not much is free in this world, so I can definitely see people being hesitant. And I love the Friendship Center. Not many people know. I mean, you do serve obviously primarily Indigenous communities and populations, and your services, you know, are mandated for like Indigenous identifying folks. But anyone, you know, is welcome to access your space and services like the hot chocolate and warming center that you were saying is a good example of that. So thank you for bringing that up. If there's anything else you want to add to that, if not, then I'll move on to the next question. A lot of them we're sort of answering as we go along, and they're just giving you opportunity to add on to your answers. So we've talked about the way that our services, you know, have changed and the way that we're adapting, whether it's, you know, positive or negative, unfortunately. We've talked about some of the main impacts and concerns that we've all had relating to COVID, which is question 4. But I kind of want to touch on, you know, what do you think can be done to alleviate some of these impacts? Talia, you know, you've mentioned a few of those things already, that, you know, getting creative to alleviate some of the impacts, you know, with food insecurity and homelessness. Is there anything else anyone wants to touch on regarding what you're doing to alleviate these impacts, or what should be done maybe to alleviate impacts, our wish list, maybe our dream of what could be done? Anyone can start. Go ahead, Erica.
Thank you. I think that I call them like the downstream effects of COVID to many people around on this panel and listening in are no mistake. This is not, a lot of this is by design. So I guess I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and then I'm going to just talk a little bit. I won't take too much time here, but access to health supports, technology, division of labor, gender roles, and what we think about care and care work, what we think about minimum wage work in the workforce. Like, these things were all very much here before COVID kind of shot like a really, but these policies are often carefully crafted and created over years and years, and and often to benefit few. So I'm hoping that in time we can maybe re-examine a lot of this and look up at the structures above that are really dictating how we live and work, right? And I know I'm talking with my politics hat on here, but your municipal, your provincial and federal governments have a lot to say about how you are going to survive in a pandemic, depending on where you are on the hierarchy of humans that are valued to them. So my big concern, and please just note I mean this, like, I'm a fundraiser. I have a big concern about the rise of basic needs charity. That's something that I don't think should exist at all, basic needs charity. I mean, I think it should be the rise and rate of it does concern me quite a bit. Rates of food bank use, soup kitchen rates. We started a student emergency fund at the university. Like, these are all there to fill the gaps handled, to me, by our government. So, and it does absolve a government from doing what they need to do too, right? So it's such a bizarre catch-22. But charity is not the charity, although it's important to meet the needs of people right now, is not the answer to me to widespread systemic issues and meeting people's basic needs. And the hard part too is that people get really personally sometimes offended by this, because people like to give, and giving kind of juggle when you're juggling with excess, maybe perhaps, or privilege. So anyway, that I would like some permanent solutions for sure there, to see some upstream investments. So like when we see these I call them downstream and upstream investments, but we see like acute emergency funding all the time, instead of like kind of taking a look at funding up here, so that when people hit the ground, we're not picking up all these pieces all the time, and instead of getting up the stream in people's lives. So that and then the last thing I want to say is and a lot of people I find here, I love all of us, but we're scared to call that out, because there's a bit of a scarcity mindset, especially in this district, that if we like kind of challenge that maybe we'll get funding the next time that funding comes out. Mm-hmm. So what needs to be done, I do think that we had to have some larger advocacy work, help for our workforce. Paid sick days for sure, income supports, frontline essential workers, care work in particular, are often held by women of color, often the lowest paid and with the least benefits and supports in the workplace. So, these effects are hurting people disproportionately for sure. And my hope is that we have we re-envision what we want our community to look like and how we care for. Yeah.
It's true.
I know that's a lot, you guys.
No, but like what you're saying is true. Like
philosophy in like a really small little amount of time, but I'm hoping that it translates with sincerity. So anyway, thank you.
The work that we're all doing, like you said, to fill the gaps in services is, well, why are there those gaps? Why do those gaps exist? Why is it up to us to like get creative to fill those gaps in services? And they're all short-term solutions that should be permanent solutions. And it breaks my heart when I see people having to resort to GoFundMe pages for medical expenses. Yes, even in Canada, right?
I don't have the same.
It's great
that come out every time the Gathering Place stats come out. Like, I have a very visceral reaction to them.
Yeah.
Oh, good, they're helping, which I do think that, but I also think, oh my gosh, like, what's going on here? Like, we need to reevaluate who we want to be in charge and what they're doing. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else anyone wants to share about alleviating impacts? Kathleen, yeah.
I have some thoughts. So yeah, and of course, and I think What we're seeing now is just the inequity of our community highlighted that is the direct result of decisions made years and decades ago. So when we deprioritize things, we don't necessarily see the impact the next day, you know, and we've seen certainly changes within our mental health supports in our communities, especially, and, you know, that people seem to be like, and we see it in the newspaper, that it's like a shock that these issues are here or that these are problems. And really they, you know, have voted for or they prioritize decisions that resulted in that. And that might not have been made yesterday or last year, but I think those of us who work in the trenches have seen this coming for a long time. But the other thing I've reflected on a lot through COVID, and this is both as a service provider and as a woman and mother myself, is really the frailty of the women's movement. And I don't mean that as any way disrespect to the women who put in endless hours and time and made huge sacrifices for all of us that identify as females, but how quick it was for women to then become the primary caregivers. And the, you know, it's one of your attendees has commented about emotional labor, and I think about that a lot. So the added stress and impact on women is disproportionate in this pandemic. And certainly we see that within our roles in the workforce as well. We're ones who are most likely in the caring positions, those that are underfunded or minimum wage provided. And so I really think about all the movement we thought we have made. And of course, those of us who work in violence against women know that there's a lot of work left to do, but how easily it was slipped away from us and how quick it was to resort back to those traditions and the disproportionate impact of different types of labor, including emotional labor. So I'm so glad that was brought up. And I'm concerned about the future of that and what that means for us as a movement and moving forward, how we can better entrench our rights and better advocate for regardless of how folks identify, right? But that's what gives my visceral reaction when I think about the last 9 or 10 months, is that a movement that took decades, even centuries to move, was stripped away in a matter of really weeks.
I just want to echo that because just in my public education position, that's how I feel right now. I feel like everything's, all the work is slipping away. I feel like I'm just grasping strings. Like, don't forget, like, intimate partner violence, like, even though you're married or you're in a relationship, like, we still practice consent and boundaries and all these things. Like, I just feel like it's like I'm going back, like I'm reverting back and like teaching things that like I have to reteach, or it's just like all this hard work that's been done over the years and years of hard work and education. It's, yeah, I feel like it's slipping away, which is really, I'm struggling with. Thank you for bringing that up. Is there anything else anyone wants to share? Megan.
So that was exactly my point. And just like the experiencing disproportionately to well, and women and any caregiver who's in a supportive position of you know, other folks, whether they be elderly or young. But I also just wanted to touch on, you know, and we've touched on this already, but like those who are already dealing with complex or developmental or like a one incident trauma, how much this has exacerbated their need for support, and then how much harder it is to access that support when there's maybe so many needing it. And so I don't know if I have like an easy answer to like what would alleviate these impacts, other than, you know, the continued, all of us here on the panel and so many others in our community who are, you know, continuing to reach out and are continuing to adapt their services and are continuing to look for ways to, you know, offer the best support that we can during this, you know, very strange, difficult time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to share? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I agree with Megan. I mean, I don't think there's any one very clear answer, especially since, you know, restrictions with COVID is like up and down, you know. But when it comes to helping alleviate the impacts, I'm not sure. Like right now, from where I am, what I see is, you know, family, a lot of family skills and education, because, you know, as a woman, you know, with my own experiences and my own traumas, especially with women who look after households all the time, there needs to be education on healthy relationships and boundaries again, like you mentioned, and there has to be trust. I'm in my own life, I can be very controlling on what goes on and how things are done, like dishes. You know, I can be very particular about that. I'm not afraid to admit it, but especially with as a woman, if you're always looking after the kids and feeling overwhelmed, in a partner relationship with a man being home all the time, that, you know, suddenly upsets that balance again, and the whole family has to relearn, you know, the different responsibilities, the different roles of being at home all together all the time, and when they need to take spaces. And one of the things that I think are useful are different tools, like having a family circle every now and again, just to talk about things that, you know, upset them, things that they're struggling with, or you know, using some of the medicines that you know, that we're taught to use, like smudging in the morning, or for other people it might be, you know, doing family meditation, and educating on what, you know, is available and reaching out. It is difficult. It is very difficult, both as service providers and as the clients, and especially for single parents, both female and male. You know, it can be very difficult. But continuing to try and educate on those tools and on those healthy relationships, on those boundaries, on those coping skills that they can use, I believe it might not click right away, you know, these things take practice, but we don't know how long this COVID's going on, you know, and I think education for, you know, our clients and even for our staff to remind ourselves about those healthy coping skills and to practice them in our own lives, especially because, you know, we can get stressed out for not feeling like we're doing enough for our clients. So learning new ways of coping in those self-care skills and those family care skills, I think is very important going forward.
Thank you for bringing that up. Those are like some great points that even as individuals, the more we work on ourselves with, you know, respecting our like boundaries and our family's boundaries, doing that work on communication, healthy relationships, those are things that help benefit us now and in the long term as well, and things that can help us move forward together, especially within the household. I can't speak obviously for other people, but even myself, I've been doing a lot of reflection inward and looking at books to help improve my communication with my partner and my communication with people and boundaries, and working on some skills to help have healthy coping skills for myself as well. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of like the education, whether it's like educating ourselves and educating others. Amanda, was there anything you wanted to say? Sorry, I saw you unmute yourself.
No, that's okay. I think so much has already been said, but so I think we always feel that we try and keep up as much as we can, and that's super difficult times. I mean, trying to organize everything for not knowing which way that goes, and then coming to work and still fulfilling all of the needs of the people we are here to help and assist is super difficult. Trying to make sure that I come in feeling just as energized as is difficult. And I know we're kind of getting into that with the one question about self-care and stuff, but I think we have to remember that it's okay to say no to a conference that you don't necessarily need to be at. Like, it is okay to do that, and then maybe say yes to the ones that really speak to you, and hopefully at some point in terms of continuing on the movement, people will just feel inspired by something someone said today, or by getting to know someone here today. But I don't know, I mean, I think likely everyone else feels the same, but change in the situation is announced, it's, you know, I feel like I don't know if I can do this anymore some days, because it's like, I, as a frontline worker, an essential worker, have to come to work, and who is going to look after my children or provide that online education? I'm not afforded the opportunity to work from home. So how do I fulfill those responsibilities and still feel really energized and able to come to work? You know, they made initially, I think there was some talks about daycare for essential workers and things like that, and the numbers aren't there to support the numbers that are needed. So how do I ensure that my kids are following the social distance protocols and not sort of risking other people's health and safety, I suppose, in these environments by calling on them to take care of my children, because the daycares are not open. The number of people who have to work, shift work, and work in these environments. But I think it's okay to say no, and not, it's difficult because we all feel the need to keep up with all of our roles and responsibilities.
For sure, and I think that plays into like that emotional lever as well. And what Erica said about filling gaps in services, like that also falls on our shoulders, not just as community service providers, but as a community, individuals in this community, or if I feel pressure, right, obviously, to fill those gaps in services. So the next question is like, how can we support each other in organizations? This will be included a bit in the follow-up package, but if you do want to share quickly just ways that people, if they want to support your program or organization, how can we do that? If you just want to share quickly, and then I'll move on to pretty much the final question. Go ahead.
So I think one of the big things I thought was that we do have a lot of information coming out on our social media, so Facebook and Instagram, whether it be self-care practices or information about what's going on in the community or information about resources and access. And so I would just invite people to support our liking those pages and following along and sharing that information to the people in their groups, and so that we would have a wider information. And also just really, really, really grateful for all of you here and all of the other members in our community who continue to work as essential workers, and continue to share the information on how we can access, because support for sexual violence and gender-based violence, but people contact us with all kinds of needs. And so being able to make those, warm referrals, knowing, and being able to share with them how to access that information feels like a very good way to, connect folks, even if it's on the phone, to the things that they really need. And also just to mention that we have a 24-hour crisis line that can be accessed anytime by anyone. So if you do need someone to talk, and there is that support there as well.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to share how we can support you or your program organization?
I can. We have a trauma dog named Chewy. He's a specially trained trauma support dog who supports both victims and first responders, but he's 100% fundraised. So we talked about some of the impacts of COVID, and that includes opportunities to do fundraising. So if anybody's looking to do some support in our community, to go to a good source, Chewy is an amazing guy, and he's all victims and first responders in our community to alleviate the impacts of trauma. We also phones, so if you have an old cell phone, we test them with 911 communications, and we can give them out to folks who just need to have a cell phone to call 911 in case of emergency. And then lastly, sort of linking back to the previous questions, and certainly some of the things that Erica said, is that a lot of our services, and certainly ours, our service in the province, and there's over 40 victim services, are currently still under a review process that's lasted now more than 2 years. And as such, our future is very uncertain. Like we don't have a budget for next year as of yet. And so I think the call is for folks, you know, instead of ringing your bells at 7 o'clock and, you know, support of essential services, is to really start to ring the bells of MPs and MPPs and dial them up and send them an email and say, you know, these services matter and we need to do more than just the standard. We need to enhance them and make sure that we don't burn out our staff that do these, and that they have the capacity to do the things that we ask them to do in a healthy way for both themselves as workers and for our community.
And make sure that they don't need to rely on community donations and the legwork and footwork that we shouldn't have to be doing, but we are doing, and it's necessary to keep these programs, our programs, afloat. They are essential services. That's why we're open, and they need to be treated as such and funded as such instead of relying on donations, which, like, donations are great. Obviously, that's how we're running. It's how we're operating right now. But that's a lot of pressure on the community, on all of you attending today, right? And that's just not a fair ask. But that's unfortunately the way things are right now. I think that's what COVID has really brought to light. Amanda, Talia, is there anything else? Sorry, Thela, is there anything else you would like to share between the two of you?
Sure. For us here, we would, most of us would agree that if everyone can do their help us out by advocating for treatment centers open up during the pandemic, there has to be a way to do it safely. And some have, not all are still closed, but clients leaving jail need treatment and not to go back to the same living conditions or homeless conditions. So advocating with that is a way to support us. Communication with clients that you may have already been doing work with while they're in custody. Please don't shy away from trying to reach out and see if someone's here. We can get a consent for you to be able to speak with us. It's really beneficial in terms of discharge planning and helping us continue what's already been started rather than reinventing and restarting the process. So emails, you would contact myself, and the same would go for male clients. You would contact Shannon, but someone, when you're calling the jail, will be able to help direct you to whoever to contact. And then donations for us, and a popular topic, but yeah, we always are super thankful and grateful for donations. We like to be able to provide with people leaving here with warm outerwear. So right now, mitts, hats, coats, things like that are in high demand. We don't have enough to keep up. We have a great relationship with Rebuilt Resources, but we love donations and need those. And I know the Elizabeth Fry Society in North Bay has been more than willing to collect those donations, because we can't have people just, you know, dropping off one coat here and there at the front of the North Bay jail. So they'll take those donations for us. And then to think about also things like toothbrushes, toothpaste, shampoo, conditioner, female hygiene, like feminine hygiene products, that kind of stuff. People are homeless and leaving here, and if we can give them a care package with maybe some snacks and some warm, it's really appreciated. It does go a long way in making people feel like they can keep going and reaching out to services. And then I will add, as Kathleen said, they have Chewy, and it was really nice to have him in for a while. He was coming in weekly for staff, which was a super nice addition to the building when he came in on our lunch breaks. It was nice to offer that support to staff on lunch.
Thank you, Amanda. Thalia, I think some of your asks for your organization were similar with the winter clothing, right?
Yeah. Well, we had the some of the other programming opening up with the suspend housing. We did ask for some of the warming donations. What's going on now, I'm not too sure. Because we're nonprofit, we don't usually accept donations. But in terms of supporting our organization and our clients, I just ask that maybe those of you watching or those of you here in the panel just become more familiar with our services. We do have some newer programs, or revamp some of our older programs, or I did mention that we hired a couple new workers, and we're always available to, or we're available to get back to you on the, if you ever need to talk. A lot of us are going on Facebook right now. So we have well, especially our healthy living program, they have a lot of fun little physical or food challenges that you can look into, but really just becoming familiar and aware of the programs that we do offer in the event that you or somebody you know might need them, or someone might come across might need them. And in terms of supporting our clients, you know, just have compassion. And know, you know, if you're not in this place that you feel like you can be kind or compassionate, it's okay to walk away without saying anything negative. I think everybody is really having a hard time as it is. And especially those of you who have families, you know, it's stressful. It's hard to have compassion for others when you're already, you know, at the end of your line. But be kind. You know, everybody's trying their best and with what they have, with their own coping skills, their own traumas or otherwise. And right now it is very complex, this whole COVID thing and the situation. So have compassion and be kind to yourself too. You know, it can be very mentally and emotionally overwhelming. If you have the chance, make that space for yourself to, you know, have a good cry or to snuggle up with a, you know, a blanket or a pillow or something, because it can be very overwhelming right now. So just be kind.
Thank you. Yes, compassion can go a long way, and everyone's best looks different. So thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else anyone would like to share?
Mine will be really quick.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I in an effort to not make this too political, because that always makes things nice and uncomfortable. But you can find me really easily online. But I've been trying hard to change the narrative. I'm sending out different things in the paper and kind of provide an alternate perspective. And you can find all that easily if you're interested. However, you can, you know, I know that politics isn't for everyone, and I know that it has caused a lot of grief too. However, you know, continuing to push back at, as everyone said here a little bit, is to continue to push back at that power and to continue to support different narratives, I think is really important, because when we are able to change power, we're able to do a lot of good. So, and again, that's not the panacea, but you know, I encourage everyone to get involved where they can, when they can, to make fundamental, permanent, positive change in people's lives.
Thank you, Erica. So the last question, just to end the discussion, and then I have I think I see 2 questions in the Q&A that we'll touch on. So this might go just past 12. Hopefully that's okay. If you need to leave, I completely understand. So just to end the panel discussion, we've already touched on some of this before, but what are some self-care practices you use or would suggest to others to use to be able to continue to do this work, but also ensuring like your own mental health is prioritized, that we talked about? And are there any positives you'd like to share? Kathleen shared a few about funding, and I think Amelia Rising as well can speak. You know, we received a lot of COVID funding. Again, though, to bring back in the politics, this funding we should have been getting before. This shouldn't have taken a global pandemic to get these grants and funding to be able to provide services. So that's my little side tangent. But yes, is there anything that you would like to suggest regarding positive mental health, keeping our health prioritized, and any positives just to end the note? And then I'll go to the Q&A box. So go ahead.
I'll start.
Okay.
So I would start with when I'll maybe speak from a personal place, and that like when I get good sleep, everything just goes better. So I've been prioritizing my sleep, and that's my first suggestion out. Not everyone has access to that. Exercise is the other thing that I would mention, and that can be, you know, just doing the laundry and going downstairs to get it and carrying it up, or, you know, piggybacking your kids around the house, or you know, taking the dog for a walk. It doesn't, you know, necessarily have to be anything specific, but that exercise is the best drug we have available to us, and it's free. So 20 minutes of exercise will give you the kind of relief and is considered good coping. And not to get into too much of the specifics of what happens in your body when you exercise, but those would be my first two. And then just to meet yourself where you're at, because we all have different, you know, ability and access, and sometimes self-care is a Zoom call or a telephone call with somebody that you aren't able to see in person. Sometimes it's saying, you know, I'm just going to have a nothing day and, you know, take a long bath and read a book. And I think it looks different for everyone. And to, in the vein of, you know, trying to do more and trying to sort of keep up with the, especially for, you know, caregivers and women taking on these dual roles of being an essential worker and being a full-time caregiver at various times. Also, just kudos to all the teachers out there, because I think they're also doing a phenomenal job, and also to the daycares who are also doing a phenomenal job. I've never been so appreciative of those community of people. But again, just to, you know, meet yourself where you're at, and some days are harder than others, and some days you feel like you can do more, but you know, to you know, reach out when you do need the extra support. There are, you know, there are places you can call and people you can talk to, but you know, do what you can.
Thank you, Megan. Does anyone else would like to share? Or if you have to go at 12, please share first.
I just have like one more thing is, I just find, I personally have been like the Megan said, like I've been a little bit hard on myself lately, you know, like hard on myself for like how I'm eating, not exercising enough, not doing enough. And I, you know, not being a better parent or not being a better partner, and so much pressure. And, you know, none of us are like immune to the impacts of this. And like my sleep's been completely messed up. My dreams have been wild. Like everything is, you know, still has not this new feeling normal yet, you know. I think this kind of goes against everything, against human nature. And even we're doing our best with what we've got here, but there's still, it lacks a lot of that interpersonal human connectedness that I think we need to survive. I guess my only thing is to try not to be too hard on yourself and do what you can. And yeah.
Thank you, Erica. If anyone doesn't have anything else to add, then I'll go to the Q&A. Yeah, go for it. More than welcome.
So being aware, self-care can look like a variety of things for multiple different people. Speaking from my experience, you know, if you can't talk to somebody, because there are a lot of people who are, especially some of the newer generations, who are uncomfortable with picking up a phone to call, you know, you could always email, always Facebook, you know, you could always find other ways. One thing that I think is a little underrated nowadays still is some of the free apps that you can access, mental health apps. Some that will walk you through breathing exercises, you know, practices for self-care, putting on, you know, different kinds of music. And when I talk about self-care a lot, I mention how the energy of something might affect you. For somebody who's with, you know, has depression or anxiety, you know, what triggers those things might be different things. For some people, it might be a color, you know, visual cue. I know a couple of people with anxiety who, you know, if they watch something on TV that's really, it's too busy, like anime, it can trigger their anxiety. So having that self-awareness too comes with practice, but it is important. But yeah, those the self-care apps can also really help when you don't have that access, or you're not comfortable with that access in speaking to a person yet. But also having a little bit of courage to reach out. Again, There's a variety of people who have, you know, dropped off the map because they're so overwhelmed with other things. It can be really hard to make time for yourself. But again, it is very important because, you know, if you can't help yourself, you can't help other people. You know, and burning out either as a mother or as a frontline worker or as another worker, you know, or, you know, even as a kid, because kids burn out too. You know, they're dealing with a lot too. You know, it's very important to try and have that courage to reach out, especially now. And while you might not be able to receive that in person, you know, or one-on-one, you might think, or you might be used to, it can still help alleviate some of the extra stress that you're going through right now. In terms of some of our Indigenous or other folk who practice their own cultural or religion, you know, you can find ways to practice those things at home. What we talk about right now a lot is our fire ceremony. Our fire ceremony, especially for those who have somebody who passed on. We have a fire for a certain amount of time and we call it a sacred fire. We don't put garbage, we don't cook in it. But if you can't go to those things, it's easier to light a candle up at home or to light a smudge at home and ask that the spirit of something to help you. Because right now, you know, there's a lot of times we need something that's bigger than ourselves to help pull us through this and to help pull us out of, you know, those negative and mental and emotional states, to realize, you know, this is only temporary. You know, this isn't going to last the rest of our lives. You know, and you know, the feelings of negativity is temporary, however real for you. And you know, it's reminding yourself that your purpose is greater than what's going on right now. And there are ways that you can help yourself spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, and or to ask for those extra self-care things from people, you know, that you might know, or that help ask for those reminders. Some people get a little embarrassed when they forget about something, but that's okay. It's really busy right now. It's okay to forget those things. So even calling somebody up, or your worker or family member, and asking for, you know, other tips and tricks that they might know, or reminders of those self-care things, can be really important right now as well.
Thank you. I'd also just quickly like to add forward to the questions. When we're talking about self-care, like I know we've talked about apps and meditation and yoga and even sleep. I do want to acknowledge that access to all of those things, even sleep, is like a privilege in and of itself. If you're homeless, your access to sleep isn't going to be as great as someone else's access to sleep who has a bed and a home. And same with accessing things online with technology. So self-care, there's someone I follow on Instagram, she talks about boring self-care, and that's even just showering, eating a piece of fruit, brushing your teeth, walking, you know, from the kitchen to the living room, taking, you know, doing these boring things to care for yourself are forms of self-care, and things that, you know, self-care looks different for everyone depending where you're at in life, right? So, and not to be hard on yourself if you can't have a nice big bubble bath with candles and whatever, like self-care can look different for everyone. And I think just doing some reflection on how to care for yourself is important. So Natalie, do you want to just go through the Q&A, and just if anyone wants to answer, please do, or if it was directed at someone specifically?
Sure. So I think this question may have been answered a bit during question 4 about the impacts and solutions during COVID-19, but it was actually from someone named, it was wondering if the group had discussed how women have been dealing with emotional labor and the consequences of that. So if anyone else had more to say on that, I just left it in the Q&A box.
I was going to say, we kind of talked about it, but go ahead, yeah.
So when it comes to dealing with that specific emotional labor, what we see is either one or the other. They either have really, they're really set on their path and they have good coping skills that they can use. They take that time for themselves, or it goes the opposite way where, you see a breakdown happen, whether it's a verbal breakdown, emotional breakdown, mental stress affecting, personal health, energy levels, whether or not someone can get up in the morning, whether or not, they have angry outbursts, or they completely shut down. So it looks different for different people, specifically when I talk about, women and mothers. It will look a little different than some of the stresses that from single women, who have, because we also have the other stresses of needing to pay rent, whether or not somebody will get evicted because they had just split up over a partnership. So there is a lot of pressure on women right now. And it's really up to whether or not they have effective coping skills, which will lead to, one or the other. Not to say that somebody with good coping skills is great all the time. It doesn't always work like that. But to have those skills to be in a good place. But there are a lot of people who are lacking healthier coping skills. So we do see a lot of violence, emotionally, mentally, or verbally. And there are some instances where women, we do see partner violence towards the men, especially in family households. Again, touching on that power balance again, and that what is the new normal, and having to go back to whether or not, relearning a healthy relationship where everybody, can't get away from each other. So.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to expand, or we can move on to the next question? Please let me know. Okay, so the next question, Natalie.
It's sort of a two-parter, but it says, would you say women are building greater capacity for resiliency because of the demands the pandemic has been putting on them? How can we as workers reflect the resiliency we are witnessing in ourselves, clients, and other women?
Take a moment.
I will attempt an answer at this. I think there is an increased demand on women's resiliency. I think there's an increased demand on everyone's resiliency during this pandemic, whether, regardless of gender. But in speaking to, sort of the dual roles that women are carrying and that sort of regression back into women taking over, primary house care or those pieces. So yes, I think the demand for resiliency has increased. I don't know if resiliency is something that we have just all the time. So some of us have a, a greater capacity to be resilient, but that, anecdotally through this pandemic, that even the most resilient are having some really tough days and, tough decisions to make. And we spoke a little bit about that and lack of trust in, the powers that be, and a vaccine that's coming down and has been really pushed through, missing many protocols that most vaccines go through in order to, create some safety. But there's a lot of, what I'm hearing is there's a lot of, privilege around whether you can actually say no to that. Based on, your employment status, or whether your kids can go to school, or whether you will, just this fear of like, will I ever be able to see my family again? Or, and so this is what I mean around these tough decisions. And I think, you know, there's this level of not knowing out there where not feeling certain about our options or what is the best decision at times, whether, you know, we have to take our kids to the grocery store because we don't have childcare, and that's not recommended, or, you know, whether I have, you know, an elderly, you know, person in my life who, you know, needs some help and support, but can I go and give that help and support? I just think it's so widespread, and that, yes, I think that we can reflect resiliency in being really gentle with ourselves and really gentle around, you know, the things that we're doing and how we're managing these day-to-day things, that, you know, practicing all the things that help us do better and help us feel calm and help us to manage the things that we need. And maybe sometimes that's just like taking some of the pressure off around the external, maybe somewhat less unnecessary pieces so that we can focus on what feels most important. I don't feel like I have a great answer for this question.
Erica, do you want to add?
I think it's hard.
So just recognizing a few panelists have had to step out to other commitments, but if you, any attendees, if you want to email me or the panelists, you will get their contact information for follow-up questions. But Erica, if you want to add on, and then I think that will be the end of today's session. Oh, yeah, unless you want to add anything else, Taylor, go for it.
It's a good question. And I'm sure you're figuring out how my brain works now, you guys, but I will zoom out. And, you know, some of us are watching this pandemic from the cheap seats. Some of us are watching it from the nosebleeds, and some of us are watching it with big screen TVs, right? So we're only as resilient as the supports and structures are around us. So I do think that there's an incredible increase on the dependence on women's resiliency. An increase of the dependence. I think women are always resilient. I think we're, you know, always have taken on so much from the second that we were born, and that is different depending on where you are, again, in that hierarchy that I've noted, but we are only as resilient as the supports around us. And yes, definitely an increase in the dependence on our resiliency. That's why we're all burning out.
I feel like I'm going to make that a quote now. That's,
yeah, it's, you know, it's, there's a cost. There is a cost, and there will be a cost to this. And so anyway, thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you.
I think it's important to mention that resiliency and strength, having those things doesn't make you any less human. You know, because, you know, if you think of even your heroes, you know, female or otherwise, you know, they're still human beings as well. You know, they're still going to have bad days, to use some other lingo, you know, they can still be a hot mess behind the scenes where you don't see, and men who, and others, and those who don't identify as, you know, people put on a good face for others, because that's tends to be what's socially accepted. But emotions are very normal. Being stressed is very normal. And in our experience, resiliency is really, you know, how much you can bounce back from that. And, you know, with this whole COVID thing, you know, it's not over yet. You know, it's, so right now we are seeing how resilient people can be, but we're also seeing how human other people can be, and how human we are. And because it's not over, I'm not sure if we can really give a full answer to how resilient people are, because resiliency a lot of times is only, we're only aware of it in hindsight. You know, we have to live first. We have to live through things. You know, a lot of women especially have lived through trauma. You know, they're survivors. You know, we're survivors. And again, learning how to balance in your life and how other people, because you can't you can't, as an individual, rely on somebody else. You can't make their decisions for them. That's what I'm saying. So making those healthy decisions, making that healthy environment really depends on yourself. So as a mother, or, as a caregiver, how I agree with, Erica and Megan, that, our women are very strong right now. They have to be, if they want, if they want to try and get to that healthy place that they want to be. But again, it is multifaceted. Resiliency will look different for somebody. And somebody's mind, if they're an addict, for example, resiliency might be getting over their addiction for 2 days during this COVID, being able to have a clear day, or, being able to smile for somebody who's depressed, after just actually laughing at a comedy show instead of worrying about everything else. But resiliency, I think the true resiliency of people is best described in hindsight. So while we have seen a lot of resiliency in our families and our communities, COVID's not over. And I expect, there's still going to be a lot of tears, a lot of anger, a lot of struggles yet to come. But there's also, resources and people who can help with that. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that was an excellent way to sort of wrap up and end this session. Thank you so much for sharing, for everyone for coming today. And for those of you that were able to stick around after 12, thank you. And thank you to those that were able to actually access the session despite some tech glitches. So hopefully everyone's able to watch this recording online, and I will post it to Amelia Rising's website. And everyone who attended today will be getting a follow-up email just with a survey evaluation and a follow-up package on how to support these organizations and some key notes and messages from today's session. So look out for that either later today or maybe even tomorrow, depending on what I can accomplish in the rest of the day. So thank you all for joining. Miigwech, thank you. And yes, enjoy the rest of your Monday and the rest of your week. So I think this is a great way to start off your week. Thank you.